Well, I haven't done a review in about 2 months, so it only felt appropriate to resurrect the channel for this specific review. My name is Ren, and this is my spoiler-free review of Daredevil Born Again. Welcome back, Marvel fans, and thank you for joining me to discuss the resurrection of the greatest comic book TV show of all time. And the question we're gathered here to answer today is it still the greatest comic book TV show of all time? Matt Murdock, the blind lawyer of Hell's Kitchen and its secret vigilante Daredevil, continues fighting for justice through his bustling law firm, while former mob boss Wilson Fisk pursues his own political endeavors in New York City. But when their past identities begin to emerge, both men find themselves on an inevitable collision course. And I'm sure it's pretty evident by now that I adore the original Daredevil series. It is, to me, the greatest comic book TV show of all time. So I'm sure it's no surprise to you that I was very excited coming into this show, but I was also very nervous. Marvel made some strange decisions while putting this show into production. It was completely revamped, and thankfully, it was revamped to be the exact show we all knew and love. It is very clearly a new chapter for this show, for this story, for all these characters. But it is in no way Disney-fied or tamed. There are some obvious green screen moments, but the violence, the blood, the action, the brutality, the grittiness that we all love about this show, all those elements that are essential and make Daredevil, they are all perfectly integrated into the narrative and thematic nature of Daredevil Born Again. A show that very smartly uses all the familiar elements to redefine the world, its characters, and ask interesting and complex questions about them. This entire first season of the show is an interrogation on a metatextual level of Daredevil being reborn. Can it be the same show? Can he be the same man when a part of him dies? And most importantly, can Matt Murdock and can the show come back from it? What I will say that is new added to the show in terms of it is now set in the MCU, that very much takes a backseat. There is one episode in the season where Matt Murdock is interacting with an established MCU character, and honestly, it is one of my favorite episodes of the season because it isn't that Matt Murdock goes to meet this character and we get to spend an episode in that character's world with Matt Murdock. That character is brought into the Daredevil world that finds its own little corner of New York City to set this story in. This is a television show that doesn't lose a beat. I was generally binging these episodes, and at the end of every episode, I was shocked. I was shocked at the ending of the first episode. I was shocked at the ending of the second episode. This is a show that makes bold, risky choices. And whether you like those bold, risky choices or not, the original show was a show that constantly made bold, risky choices. But most importantly, it also understood its characters. And Daredevil Born Again very much understands its characters. It understands that the strength of this story is the dynamic between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk. And what's so fascinating to see in this season is how they're both so similar, both struggling, wrestling with the darker halves of their souls, trying to not succumb to that temptation. And where with Wilson Fisk, it keeps on testing him and testing him. The world keeps pulling him back in that direction. But for Matt Murdock, Daredevil Born Again is a crisis of faith. A brilliant way to frame his arc in this context of bringing this show, these characters, this story back to life. As a man who is wrestling with the darker half of his soul after spending years trying to fix the system, trying to fight the system in more ways than one. But can he truly be whole when he denies this one part of himself? And that is the beauty of this story, because this question applies to both Wilson Fisk and Matt Murdock. This internal struggle constantly brewing within Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, and how individually they manifest outwardly. This is the show Daredevil Born Again. Whether it is Matt's crisis of faith, whether it is Wilson's longing still to please his father, but more directly his wife, and his struggling relationship while he still has a world left to crumble. How do you find the will to keep going, the will to come back, the will to resurrect when, in the case of Matt Murdock, your entire world has just been devastating? And what if you're the answer for it? Daredevil Born Again, Daredevil as a whole, did and now continues to do the best interrogation on the price of being a hero. And it does that interrogation in a real way, in a way that is complex, in a way that is gritty and grounded in all those aspects that we love about the show. And I may be the only person who watches Daredevil Born Again and feels this way, but because the city is such a character and you have such a richly defined dynamic between protagonist and antagonist, this feels like a James Bond show. Except Daredevil is James Bond, and it feels specifically like Skyfall, a story where our hero fails and refuses to be the hero once again, refuses to be the whole of himself. And that is what creates his own self destruction. And the exciting trade off for that, as the story builds to the rebirth of Daredevil, the way we see Matt struggling with this loss of this part of himself, is so many courtroom scenes that are exciting because they're all different cases, but we see Matt for who he truly is, someone with compassion, someone who tries to overcome the rigged system. But we also see Matt trying these very risky strategies that are dangerous, not only for the people he's defending, but for his own firm. If he's left the Daredevil side of himself behind, he not only has his lawyer self, that's at risk. And what if he loses that? Who can he help? Even himself, if he loses this part of himself as well. It gets into that metatextualization of the show that I discussed. This is very much a show that, even in its opening credits, after an extremely cold open for the season, it's so entrenched into the DNA of the series, and it's what adds to the brilliance and the intrigue of this world and these two characters constantly going up and up, trying to not only escape each other, but escape part of themselves. And yet they're always meeting at this emotional crossroads. And while we don't have too much of them together in this whole season, there are great key moments for the story where they are together, and the show knows when to deliver that. But by keeping them apart, but constantly testing their limits to bring out those parts of themselves, those quote unquote alter egos, makes their presence in this show constant. Vincent D'Onofrio, Charlie Cox, honestly just as brilliant as ever. As soon as you see them sitting down across from each other in that scene from the trailer in the first episode, you just feel like you are back. You get to see very different sides of New York. You get to explore different characters, different stories. New York is a character in this show, and you see all the similarities, all the differences between the two New Yorks, where Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk live, the places in New York where they inhabit. And the writers, as well as the directors of Daredevil Born Again, found a way to perfectly balance our familiar characters they are being brought back and the addition of new, interesting, compelling, but important characters that serve the narrative and add weight because of their presence. It all adds to Matt's journey and him coming to terms with himself. Everyone that already knew Matt Murdock from the previous seasons of the show, you get these moments where Matt has to come to terms with what he's telling himself, what the little voices in his head are telling him, and now it goes against his faith. And the balance that he has to find there, those answers, usually those moments of realization, always come from the returning characters, the people that knew him, the people that have been there through all those struggles, those key moments in his life. And those same mistakes he did that cost him relationships before, he's just repeating them again because of this internal struggle. Obviously, we know John Bernthal is in this show as the Punisher, and when you see the Punisher in his action sequences, oh my god, it's just as gloriously violent as before. The moments we have between Matt Murdock and Frank Castle in this show are so good because they are so different. Because you have characters that are in such a different position in life than they were the last time they saw each other. Where you'll see them both talking in one of the episodes, you're like, why is Frank the more level-headed of the two of these people? Karen Page as well, one of my favorite characters, and without going too much into it, I love that this show find a way to let us know things never were entirely resolved between Matt and Karen, but they were so good for each other. They are necessary for each other, and how that contrasts with the new additions, the new people, the new characters in Matt Murdock's life, the new characters in Wilson Fisk's life, who also has such a different dynamic with Vanessa this time around. Genuinely, speaking of Karen, speaking of Frank, speaking of Vanessa, I have no idea what show this was going to be without those characters, because the story they chose to tell with this first season of Daredevil Born Again is the perfect story to tell on a meta level, on a narrative level. After such time away, these characters have been weary, they have been spent, their lives have kept going even when we didn't have seasons. Later on in the season, when you meet tragedy for these characters and moments of desperation, moments that actually test who these characters are, who they want to be, there are no easy answers. There is no clear-cut black and white way to solve things. That represents this world that we live in and that we see in this story of corrupt politicians, corrupt cops, criminals that aren't all they appear to be, a lawyer that understands the brokenness of the system, and such great commentary. But the show is able to evenly balance it with moments of great triumph and satisfying payoff for the story they are telling. Whether it is the little twists and turns along the way, the incredible action set pieces and choreography. There is a lot more CGI in Daredevil Born Again than there ever was before, but that is only because Daredevil is now using his batons to swing around the buildings in New York City to get to places faster. And while it is evident, it is clear, particularly in the first episode, to me doesn't really get in the way of what the show is in and of itself, because Daredevil Born Again is a violent show, and it doesn't waste any time in showing you that on the premiere episode. That is a gut punch, to say the least. The action set pieces are just as brutal. The choreography is fantastic. You do see people getting their heads and their brains blown off. You get blood everywhere, especially with Muse, who is such a creepy villain in this season. However, Muse is also the weakest element of the show. And that doesn't really speak to that storyline being bad. It just speaks to the quality of everything else, where as soon as they start that story, you figure everything out like in the moment where they start doing it. And it's just felt deflating, even how it connects to everything else. It's a bit adjacent to the side. So Daredevil Born Again feels more in line with season 2 of Daredevil, where it was all good, but the storylines didn't necessarily converge in a satisfying way. And Muse is the one story in the season that doesn't really impact much of everything else in very direct ways. If we get consistently good shows of this quality from Marvel, yes, they are back, and so is still the greatest comic book TV show of all time. But that's just what I thought of Daredevil Born Again. I want you to start the conversation about it in the comments below about the first 3 seasons. Feel free to talk spoilers about the first 2 episodes of Daredevil Born Again now on Disney Plus while you wait for the rest of the season and I wait a year for season 2. Anything and everything down there. If you want to see more reviews like this, I reviewed most things in the MCU. There's a few very late reviews for movies and TV shows that I have to bring out. But if you don't want to miss those and anything like this anymore, talk more movies and TV with me. This is the place to be. Click that subscribe button and you won't miss any future conversations on your favorite movies and TV. Daredevil Born Again is Matt Murdock's Skyfall, set in its own moody, layered corner of the MCU while boasting stylish, bloody, and violent action. It's a complex morality tale and a redemption story that reignites Cox and D'Onofrio's poignant dynamic in a gritty revival that proudly continues the show's legacy. I'm giving Daredevil Born Again Season 1 an A-. Thank you so much for watching, Marvel family. Remember to start the conversation about Daredevil Born Again in the comments below, and let me know what other Netflix Marvel character should be brought back for a Born Again version of their series. Anything and everything down there. I'll be back very soon with more videos, and I hope to see you there. So until the next one, love each other, and love the movies.